Chapter 10. The Measure of a Man. Part 1. The Calculation. 3 weeks after the resurrection, a mathematician named Dr. Yuki Tanaka sat in her apartment, staring at equations that shouldn't work. She'd been analyzing the accounted-for spread for David Merchant, tracking the pattern, looking for the mechanism, trying to understand how a status could appear in databases without being programmed. But what she'd found defied every principle of data science she'd ever learned. The spread wasn't random. It wasn't algorithmic. It wasn't following any conventional pattern of viral transmission or network effects. It was following a different logic entirely. Yuki had mapped it, graphed it, modeled it 17 different ways. Every model showed the same thing. The spread was based on recognition, not transaction, on being seen, not being counted, on qualitative transformation, not quantitative accumulation. It operated on gold principles in a silver world, and it was working. More than working, it was accelerating. Yuki pulled up her latest calculation, the one that had made her quit working for Merchant 3 days ago, the one that had made her realize she couldn't serve the empire anymore. The math was simple, elegant, beautiful. Each person marked accounted for carried 20,000 units of redemptive value, not in dollars, not in productivity metrics, not in any conventional measure, in something else, something she could calculate but couldn't define, something that looked like love measured in impact, like grace quantified by transformation, like the 30% finally given numerical weight, 14,000 units into 70%. The measurable portion, work, time, effort, skill, contribution, all the things systems could already count, 6,000 units in the 30%. The unmeasurable portion, worth, dignity, love, creativity, beauty, all the things systems pretended didn't exist because they couldn't quantify them. Together, 20,000 units of full human value. And the stunning thing, the thing that had made Yuki cry when she'd first calculated it, was that everyone had the same measure, rich or poor, documented or undocumented, productive or disabled, employed or homeless. Everyone 20,000 units, not because they'd earned it, because they existed, because they were human, because they were made in the image of God, whether or not they acknowledged God. Yuki had shown the calculation to Merchant, had tried to explain what she'd found. He'd dismissed it. That's not how value works. Value is determined by markets, by productivity, by what people contribute. That's how silver value works, Yuki had said. But this is gold value, inherent, universal, non-transactional. There's no such thing. The data says otherwise. Then the data is wrong. That's when Yuki had quit, because she'd spent her career serving systems that measured everything and recognized nothing, and she couldn't do it anymore. Now she sat in her apartment, surrounded by equations, and wrote a paper that would never be published in any journal she'd previously submitted to. The Measure of a Man, Quantifying Inherent Human Worth in Post-Market Economics. Abstract. Traditional economic models measure human value through productivity, consumption, and market participation. This paper proposes an alternative framework based on emergent data patterns from municipal systems, following the accounted-for phenomenon. The framework suggests that human worth is universal, inherent, and measurable, not through contribution, but through existence. Each person carries 20,000 units of value, 14,000 in measurable capacity, the 70%, and 6,000 in unmeasurable essence, the 30%. This ratio appears consistently across diverse populations, suggesting a fundamental constant in human worth, independent of circumstance, achievement, or social recognition. She wrote for 6 hours straight, poured every calculation, every graph, every insight into the paper. When she finished, she read it once, then she did something she'd never done before. She posted it for free, open access, no journal gatekeepers, no peer review, No institutional validation, just truth, released into the world, to be judged not by academic credibility but by lived experience. The paper went viral immediately. Not in economics departments, they dismissed it as pseudoscience, but in communities, among people, with those who'd been measured by systems and found wanting, who'd been told they were worth nothing or not enough or only valuable if they produced. They read the paper and wept because someone had finally done the math that proved what their hearts had always known. They were valuable, all of them, equally, inherently, no exceptions. Part 2. Carlos Rebuilds. Carlos Mendez stood in front of his house in Phoenix for the first time in 14 months. His wife Maria stood beside him. Their 3 children, Sofia, 8, Diego, 6, Anna, 4, clung to his legs like he might disappear again if they let go. "It's still here," Carlos said, his voice breaking. I thought they would have taken it, foreclosed, something." Maria squeezed his hand. "We made it work. Barely, but we made it." Carlos looked at the house. Small, stucco, 1 bathroom, needed repairs. The American dream on minimum wage and food stamps, and the kind of desperation that made you choose between electricity and groceries. But it was theirs. They'd kept it. Maria had worked 2 jobs while he was detained. Her mother had watched the kids. They'd eaten rice and beans for 8 months straight. But they'd made the mortgage payments. Barely. "I'm sorry," Carlos said for the 100th time. "I'm so sorry I put you through—" "Stop," Maria interrupted. "You didn't put us through anything. And the system did. You got pulled over for a broken taillight. That's all you did wrong." "I should have fixed it sooner." "You should have been documented," Maria corrected. "But that's on Congress, not on you. You've been here since you were 6 years old. This is your country, whether or not they acknowledge it." Carlos thought about Marcus, about the 3 days in detention, about the conversation that had changed everything. You're not worthless, you're priceless. There's a difference. He'd been carrying those words for 3 weeks, turning them over in his mind like a stone in his pocket, trying to believe them. "I got a job," Carlos said. "A construction. It starts Monday, legal this time. And they said my status is, I don't know what it is, but the work authorization came through. Something about being accounted for." Maria smiled. "And that status saved us. Our caseworker said it overrode everything. Medical bills, utility payments, late fees. Everything got forgiven, not erased, accounted for differently. I don't understand." "Me neither, but I'm grateful for it." They walked into the house. The kids ran to their rooms to show Carlos everything he'd missed. Drawings, school projects, a loose tooth Diego had lost. Normal life, beautiful life, precious life. The life the system said wasn't worth protecting because Carlos didn't have the right papers. That night, after the kids were asleep, Carlos sat with Maria on their worn couch and told her about Marcus. "He was in detention with me, a black guy, older. They said he had no documentation at all, like he'd never existed." "What happened to him?" "I don't know. They released everyone except him. Then I heard I don't know, disappeared. But people are saying he was more than just a detainee, that he was something else." "Like what?" Carlos hesitated, then said it. "Like Jesus, like Christ returned." Maria looked at him. "You believe that?" "I don't know, but I believe he saw me, really saw me. When the system said I was nobody, he saw me and said I was priceless. And that changed something. Made me remember I'm not just my documentation. I'm a father, a husband, a man. And that's worth something, whether or not ICE agrees." Maria took his hand. "You're worth everything to us." "I know, but it's more than that. It's not just worth to you. It's worth, period, a universal worth, the kind that exists whether anyone acknowledges it or not." "That's what faith is," Maria said. Believing you're valuable because God says so, not because society says so. Yeah, Carlos said. And that's what Marcus taught me. By just being there, by being erased and still being real, by showing that you can delete someone from every database and they're still accounted for in the ledger that matters. He paused. I want to live like that. I want to live like someone who's been accounted for, not proving my worth, just being grateful for it. How? I don't know yet, but I think it starts with seeing other people the way Marcus saw me, as valuable, as priceless, as worthy of recognition regardless of their papers or their productivity or their position. Maria nodded. We could start with our neighbors, the Rodriguez family. They're undocumented too. Terrified. We could tell them what happened, how the status spread, how grace is real. Yeah, Carlos said. We could do that. 2 days later, Carlos and Maria invited the Rodriguez family over for dinner. Told them about the accounted for status, about how it had saved them, about how it was spreading. Within a week, the Rodriguez family was marked. Within a month, 12 other families on their street. Grace spreading, person to person, recognition multiplying. The kingdom coming not through programs or policies, but through people choosing to see each other. Carlos rebuilt his life, not by climbing back to where he'd been before detention, but by building something different, something gold instead of silver. He worked construction Monday through Friday, spent Saturdays with his kids, spent Sundays with his neighbors, sharing meals and stories and the testimony of being accounted for. He didn't get rich, didn't accumulate wealth, didn't achieve the American dream as it was conventionally defined, but he flourished, because flourishing, he'd learned, wasn't about having more. It was about being more fully who you already were, more fully present, more fully grateful, more fully alive, more fully human. Part 3. Judge Rodriguez transforms the bench. Judge Maria Rodriguez's sentencing of probation instead of prison time triggered exactly what she'd expected, an appeal. The prosecutor's office filed a motion claiming abuse of discretion, argued that Rodriguez had ignored sentencing guidelines, that she'd elevated personal philosophy over legal precedent. The appellate court scheduled oral arguments for May 15th. Maria prepared for defense with the kind of care she used to reserve for death penalty appeals, because, in a way, this was a death penalty case. If the appellate court sided with the prosecutor, it wouldn't just reverse her specific ruling. It would send a message to every judge in the jurisdiction. Choose measurement over mercy, and we'll uphold you. Choose grace over guidelines, and we'll overturn you. It would kill the transformation before it could spread. Maria worked with her law clerk, a young woman named Jessica Chen, who'd been with her for 2 years, to build the argument. The case law is against us, Jessica said. Sentencing discretion is broad, but it's not unlimited. The guidelines exist for a reason. The guidelines exist to create predictability, Maria corrected, to make sentencing uniform, to prevent judges from being arbitrary. All good goals, but they assume the purpose of sentencing is punishment and deterrence. What if there's a third purpose, which is restoration, transformation, recognition of the person's capacity to change? That's restorative justice theory. It's not mainstream legal doctrine. Not yet, Maria said. But it could be. If we make the case that sentencing someone to prison when probation would achieve better outcomes isn't just compassionate, it's legally sound, more sound than reflexively imprisoning everyone the guidelines suggest. Jessica pulled up data, recidivism rates for prison versus probation, cost comparisons, studies on rehabilitation effectiveness. The data supports you, Jessica said. Probation works better than prison for low-level offenders. Less recidivism, lower costs, better outcomes. Then that's our argument, Maria said. I didn't ignore the guidelines. I applied a higher standard, the standard of effectiveness, the standard of actually achieving justice instead of just processing people. They worked 18-hour days for 2 weeks, built a brief that was part legal analysis, part manifesto, part testimony. The purpose of sentencing is not to satisfy abstract guidelines, but to achieve concrete justice. Justice that recognizes the humanity of the defendant. Justice that considers not just the crime, but the person. Justice that asks not what does this person deserve, but what does this person need to flourish. The brief cited everything: case law, statutory language, constitutional principles, data on rehabilitation, studies on restorative justice. But underneath all the legal authority was a simpler argument. People are valuable, worth protecting, worth investing in, worth recognizing as more than their worst decisions. That was the gold beneath the silver. The day before oral arguments, Marcus appeared to Maria in her chambers. She wasn't surprised this time. She'd been half expecting it. "You came to tell me I'm going to lose," she said. "No," Marcus replied. "I came to tell you you've already won." "The appellate court hasn't ruled yet. I'm not talking about the court. I'm talking about you. You chose grace over certainty, mercy over measurement. That's victory, whether or not they uphold your ruling." "But if they overturn me—" "Then you'll have planted a seed," Marcus said. "In the record, in the legal discourse, in the minds of everyone who reads your brief. Seeds don't look like victory when you plant them. They look like loss, like burying something in dirt and hoping it grows." "I want more than seeds," Maria admitted. "I want transformation. I want the system to change." "The system is changing," Marcus said, "right now, because of you and 11 others like you, because you chose to be faithful, even when it cost, because you recognized that your position was a platform for witness, not just a job to preserve." "What if I lose my position?" "Then you'll have lost something worth losing, to gain something worth keeping. Not all positions are worth keeping. Some need to be sacrificed so truth can be told." "That's easy for you to say. You're—" Maria stopped. "What are you exactly? Are you really Christ, or just a very good man who people are projecting onto?" Marcus smiled. "Does it matter?" "Yes. Why?" "Because if you're Christ, then grace is objectively real. Resurrection is fact. The kingdom is guaranteed. But if you're just a man, then maybe this is all wishful thinking. Maybe grace is just a nice idea that won't survive contact with reality." "And which would require more faith?" Marcus asked. "Believing in guaranteed grace, or choosing grace anyway, even if you're not sure it's guaranteed?" Maria thought about that. "The second one. Exactly. So maybe I'm Christ. Maybe I'm just a man bearing witness to Christ. Maybe I'm the pattern incarnate, or just someone following the pattern. Does it change what you're called to do?" "No," Maria admitted. "Then do it. Not because you know it'll work, but because it's right. Because you've been shown mercy and can't help extending it. Because you've been accounted for and can't help accounting for others." He stood to leave. "Wait," Maria said. "Will I see you again?" "You're seeing me now. You'll keep seeing me. And every person you show mercy to, and every defendant you recognize as more than their crime. In every choice you make for grace over greed." Then he was gone. Maria went to oral arguments the next day with peace she couldn't explain. The prosecutor argued vigorously, cited case after case supporting strict adherence to guidelines, painted Maria as a rogue judge imposing personal philosophy. Maria argued calmly, cited data, explained her reasoning, made the case for effectiveness over uniformity. The 3-judge appellate panel asked hard questions, seemed skeptical, seemed inclined to overturn. Maria left the courtroom thinking she'd lost. 3 weeks later, the decision came down. Affirmed. Not just upheld, affirmed, with an opinion that would reshape sentencing law in the jurisdiction. While sentencing guidelines provide valuable structure, They are not mandatory constraints that override judicial discretion exercised in pursuit of justice. Judge Rodriguez's decision to prioritize rehabilitation over incarceration, supported by substantial evidence of effectiveness and aligned with statutory purposes of sentencing, falls well within the bounds of lawful discretion. Moreover, her approach, recognizing the full humanity of defendants and considering their capacity for transformation, reflects the highest purposes of our justice system. We affirm. The opinion was written by Judge Sarah Chen, the newest member of the appellate court, the one who'd read the 12 witnesses' testimonies, the one who'd been marked accounted for 2 weeks earlier. Grace spreading, even to the appellate bench, even to the places that were supposed to be immune to transformation. Maria read the opinion 3 times, then she called her law clerk. "Jessica, clear my afternoon. We're going through every pending sentencing, every one, and we're asking the same question. What does this person need to flourish? Not what do they deserve, what do they need?" "That's going to take weeks." "Then we'll take weeks. This is what the position is for. Not just processing people, recognizing them." Jessica smiled. "I'll start pulling files." Part 4. Patricia's New Office. Patricia Chen didn't quit her job at the Office of Public Records. She transformed it. Not through policy changes or new directives or official initiatives, through small choices, daily decisions, incremental shifts in how she processed people. Every time someone came to her window with documentation issues, name misspellings, missing forms, bureaucratic tangles, she asked herself one question. What would Marcus do? Not what does the policy require, but what does this person need? Sometimes they were the same. Sometimes policy required exactly what the person needed, but sometimes they weren't. Sometimes policy said, reject this application or flag for investigation, or deny for insufficient documentation. And Patricia would look at the person in front of her, the tired mother who'd been trying to register her child for school, the elderly immigrant who'd been filing the same form for 6 months, the homeless man who needed an ID to apply for work, but needed an address to get an ID, and she'd see not a problem to reject, but a person to recognize. So she'd find a way, a form that hadn't been tried, a waiver that might apply, a supervisor who might approve an exception, a pathway through the bureaucracy that required creativity and persistence, and a willingness to see the human instead of just the file. It was exhausting. It took longer. It made her stats look worse on paper, but it transformed lives. One day, a young woman came to her window, early 20s, nervous, carrying a folder full of documents. "I need to register my baby," she said, "but I don't have, the father isn't, I'm not." She was crying now. Patricia waited, patient, present. "The father left when I was pregnant. I don't have his information, and they said I need both parents to register the birth. But I don't have both parents. It's just me and my baby, and I don't know what to do." Patricia looked at the form. It did require both parents' information, standard protocol, designed for standard families, but families weren't standard anymore, if they ever had been. "What's your baby's name?" Patricia asked. "Hope," the young woman said. "I named her Hope because that's all I have." Patricia felt something break open in her chest. "Hope," she repeated. "That's beautiful. That's perfect." She pulled up a different form, one designed for single-parent households, one that didn't require the absent father's information. "You can use this form," Patricia said. "It's for parents in your situation. You'll need to sign an affidavit attesting to the circumstances, but you can register Hope. She'll be accounted for." The young woman stared. "Really?" "Really. They told me at the other office it was impossible, that I had to have the father's information or I couldn't register her, that she'd be undocumented." "They were wrong," Patricia said. "Not maliciously, just limited, by thinking policy is rigid, when it's actually flexible, by thinking rules are walls when they're actually frameworks. She processed the registration, printed the certificate, handed it to the young woman. "Hope is now officially real," Patricia said. "Documented, recognized, accounted for." The young woman took the certificate like it was made of gold. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." "I do," Patricia said. "I know exactly what it means. It means hope exists, matters, counts. Whether or not her father acknowledged her, whether or not the first office recognized her. She's accounted for now." The young woman left. Patricia sat at her window and felt the weight of what she'd just done. Not just registered a birth, testified to worth, bore witness to the truth that humans were valuable, whether or not they fit the forms, whether or not the systems easily accommodated them. She'd seen hope, both the baby and the concept, and counted her. That night, Patricia checked the database. Hope's record was there, marked, accounted for. Patricia smiled. The status was spreading not just through passive transmission, but through active recognition, through people in positions choosing to see, choosing to count, choosing to account for those the system would otherwise overlook. She pulled up her own record, looked at her status, accounted for. Not because she'd earned it, because she'd chosen it. By choosing to recognize others, she'd recognized herself. By accounting for them, she'd been accounted for. The measure of a person, she realized, wasn't what you achieved. It was who you saw, who you counted, who you recognized. That was the gold beneath the silver. That was the kingdom coming. Part 5. James writes the Gospel. James Carter finished his manuscript on June 1st. 3 months of writing, 12 hours a day, pouring everything he'd witnessed into 400 pages of testimony. He called it simply the Gospel according to the witnesses, not Gospel of Marcus Ellison, not Gospel of the Second Coming, not anything grandiose or claiming, just what we witnessed, what we saw, what transformed us. The manuscript told the story chronologically, from Marcus's filing of In God We, through the 70 witnesses, through the betrayal, through the trial, through the erasure, through the resurrection. But it wasn't hagiography, wasn't propaganda, wasn't sanitized or triumphant. It was honest. James included his own betrayal, detailed it, explained how he'd given the Federal Reserve 30 pieces of understanding, how he'd tried to commodify grace, how he'd chosen significance over faithfulness. He included the witnesses' doubts, their confusion, their moments of thinking maybe they'd imagined it all. He included the empire's perspective, merchants' fear, Morrison's certainty that he was following the law, the system's logical but ultimately hollow justifications. He included the suffering, the detention, the bureaucratic violence, the slow crushing of human spirit by systems designed to process rather than recognize. And he included the transformation, not just the miraculous, though he documented that too, but the ordinary, the daily choices, the small recognitions, the incremental spreading of grace. When he finished, he sent copies to 11 people. The other witnesses asked for their feedback. They responded within days. From Patricia: "This is it. This is what we saw. Thank you for honoring the complexity." From Maria: "You didn't pull punches on yourself. That takes courage. The gospel has always required confession." From Sandra: "This reads like Acts, not polished, not systematic, just witnesses testifying to what they experienced." From Sarah: "I forgive you, by the way, for the betrayal. I should have said that sooner. This manuscript proves you've learned what grace means." James cried when he read Sarah's message. Then he published the manuscript, not through a traditional publisher, not through academic presses or religious houses or any institution that would try to control the message. He published it for free, online, open access, Creative Commons license. Anyone could read it, copy it, distribute it, translate it. The gospel, James believed, should never be proprietary. Within a week, it had been downloaded 100,000 times. Within a month, 1 million. Within 3 months, 10 million. It was translated into 47 languages, published in print by small presses in 12 countries, read in churches, mosques, temples, community centers, coffee shops, and prison libraries. It became the testimony that defined the movement, not because it claimed authority, because it claimed nothing except truth witnessed, and people recognized truth when they encountered it. Not everyone, not even most, but enough, always enough. Part 6. The 20,000 Revealed. On June 15th, Marcus appeared to Yuki Tanaka in her apartment. She was working on a follow-up paper, expanding her calculations, trying to understand the deeper mathematics of redemption. She looked up and he was sitting in her reading chair. Yuki didn't scream, didn't even seem surprised. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said. "You were?" Marcus smiled. "The math predicted it. Your appearances aren't random. They follow a pattern. You appear to people who've reached a threshold, who've calculated something that brings them to the edge of understanding." "And what have you calculated?" "The 20,000, Yuki said. "The full measure. I've been trying to understand what it means, why that number, why that ratio. And I can't quite get there. I can calculate it, I can model it, I can show that it's real, but I can't explain what it is, what the units actually measure." Marcus stood and walked to her whiteboard. It was covered in equations, ratios, integrals, derivations. "You're close," he said, "but you're still thinking in silver terms, trying to quantify gold. It can't be done." "Then how do I understand it?" "By experiencing it," Marcus said, "not by measuring it. The 20,000 isn't a calculation. It's a gift. It's the full measure of what it means to be human, made in the image of God, valuable beyond price." "But I have a price," Yuki said. "The market sets it, my salary, my hourly rate as a consultant, my—" "Your market price is silver," Marcus interrupted gently. "Your actual worth is gold. The 20,000 is gold. It doesn't trade, doesn't fluctuate, doesn't depend on performance or position or productivity." "Then what does it depend on?" "Nothing," Marcus said. "That's the point. It's inherent, universal, unconditional. You have it because you exist, because you were created with infinite care for infinite purpose, by infinite love." Yuki felt tears starting. "I've spent my whole career measuring things, quantifying things, reducing complexity to numbers, and you're telling me the most important thing can't be measured?" "No," Marcus said. "I'm telling you it has already been measured by God and found to be worth everything, worth incarnation, worth crucifixion, worth resurrection. The 20,000 is just a glimpse, a shadow, of that infinite worth expressed in finite terms." "Why 20,000 specifically?" "Because numbers matter to you, because you needed a calculation to help you see what your heart already knew. Because the 70% and 30%, 14,000 and 6,000, needed to add up to something that felt complete, whole, sufficient." Yuki looked at her equations, saw them differently now, not as measurements of worth, but as testimonies to it, not as attempts to calculate the incalculable, but as mathematical poetry, as numeric worship. "What do I do with this?" she asked. "What you've already done," Marcus said. "Share it. Let people who need numbers see that even the numbers testify to grace, that even mathematics, pure, abstract, rigorous mathematics, points to the truth that humans are valuable beyond measure." "Will people believe it?" "Some will, some won't. But everyone who reads your work will have encountered the idea that they're worth 20,000 units of something that can't be bought or sold, or earned, or lost. And that idea, once planted, grows." Marcus touched her shoulder. Thank you for counting what the world says is uncountable, for measuring what the system says doesn't exist, for proving that even science can testify to grace." Then he was gone. Yuki sat at her desk and wept, not from sadness, from recognition, from understanding, finally, that her worth wasn't in her degrees or her publications or her consulting fees. It was in her existence, all 20,000 units of it, measured not by markets, but by God. She opened a new document and started writing, not a paper this time, a testimony. "I spent my career measuring everything, but I couldn't measure the only thing that mattered, that I was valuable, not because of what I calculated, but because of who calculated me. God, who counts different, who measures not what we do, but who we are, who accounts for us before we can account for ourselves." She wrote for hours, poured her heart onto the page, not with equations this time, with experience, with transformation, with witness. When she finished, she had 10 pages. She titled it, "Confession of a Mathematician: Why the Numbers Don't Add Up, and Why That's Beautiful." She posted it alongside her academic paper. Within days, both had been shared 1,000,000 times. The academic paper gave people the math. The confession gave them the meaning. Together, they testified to the full measure of a human, both the 70% that could be calculated and the 30% that could only be experienced, both the silver that circulated and the gold that anchored, both the doing and the being, both what we achieve and who we are. 20,000 units of grace, given to everyone, equally, freely, forever. Part 7. The Empire's Last Stand. David Merchant watched the movement spread with the detachment of someone watching their own execution. The accounted-for status was everywhere now. Over 2 million people marked, 17 cities, 31 states, spreading internationally. His empire was crumbling, not dramatically, not through revolution or market crash or any single catastrophic event, but through erosion, through people choosing differently, through employees quitting extractive positions to pursue meaningful work, through investors divesting from debt-based industries, through consumers opting out of scarcity economics. The Merchant Financial Group had lost 40% of its assets in 3 months. Not through bad investments, through redemption, people paying off debt early, choosing not to take new loans, prioritizing relationship over consumption. The system, it turned out, only worked if people believed they needed to participate, and an increasing number of people were discovering they didn't. Merchant sat in his office, the one with the view, the one that used to make him feel powerful, and contemplated ruin. Not just financial ruin, though that was coming. Personal ruin. The destruction of everything he'd built his identity on. He'd spent his life accumulating silver, and discovered too late that silver without gold was just metal, shiny, impressive, worthless. His phone rang. Elena. "David, we need to talk about Chapter 11. Bankruptcy, the thing that happened to other people. People who weren't smart enough, weren't ruthless enough, weren't David Merchant." "How bad?" "Bad. We're over-leveraged. Our portfolio is based on debt that's being forgiven. The municipal bonds are worthless because cities are reforming their revenue models. The distressed assets aren't distressed anymore because people are being accounted for. We bet on scarcity and grace showed up instead." "Can we restructure?" "We could try, but the fundamental problem isn't structure, it's premise. We built an empire on the assumption that people needed to be afraid, needed to be desperate, needed to participate in systems that extracted value from their suffering. And they don't anymore. They're opting out, and we don't have a business model for people who choose freedom over fear." Merchant closed his eyes. "So, it's over." "The empire is over," Elena said. "But you're not. You could do something different." "Like what?" "Like what you should have been doing all along. building instead of extracting, creating instead of consuming, serving instead of dominating. I don't know how to do that. Neither does anyone else when they start. But you learn, you try, you fail, you try again. That's the pattern. The pattern, Merchant repeated. Marcus's pattern. Yes, death and resurrection, tomb and empty tomb, erasure and revelation. You tried to erase grace, and it multiplied. Now you can either resist to the bitter end or surrender and see what comes after. I don't know if I can surrender. Then you'll lose anyway, Elena said. But if you lose while clinging to control, you lose everything. If you lose while learning to let go, you might find something worth more than what you lost. Merchant sat in silence for a long time after Elena hung up. Then he did something he'd thought about every day for 3 months, but hadn't had the courage to do. He sent an email to the 12 witnesses. Subject: Repentance. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I tried to erase Marcus Ellison because he threatened my system. I orchestrated his administrative deletion. I built a task force designed to neutralize his message while preserving the empire that message challenged. I did all of this believing I was right, believing the system needed protection, believing order mattered more than grace. I was wrong. Marcus was right about everything, about value being inherent, about grace being real, about the kingdom coming through descent instead of dominion. I'm writing to ask, is there a place for me, in the movement, in the kingdom, for someone who spent his entire life serving the empire? Or am I beyond redemption? David Merchant. He sent it, then he waited. 12 hours later, a response came from James Carter. David, I betrayed Marcus too, gave them 30 pieces of understanding that they used to commodify grace, spent weeks convinced I was beyond redemption. Then Marcus appeared to me and told me about Peter, about how the betrayer can be restored, about how grace always has the last word. You're not beyond redemption. Nobody is. That's what redemption means. There's a meeting tomorrow, 7 p.m., Church of the Holy Cross, basement. It's for people who've been accounted for and are learning what that means. You should come, not because you've earned it, because you exist, because you're one of the 20,000 worth of value, whether or not you acknowledge it. We'll see you there, James. Merchant read the message 17 times. Then he did something he hadn't done since he was a child in Gary, Indiana, trying to survive in a world that said he was worthless. He wept, not from sadness, from relief, from the possibility, still tentative, still frightening, still almost too good to believe, that he might be accounted for, that even the architect of empire might be redeemed, that even someone who'd spent his life serving silver might learn to recognize gold. The next night, David Merchant walked into the basement of the Church of the Holy Cross. 73 people were there, former detainees, activists, bureaucrats who'd chosen mercy, teachers and judges and records clerks and construction workers, people who'd been marked accounted for and were learning to live like it was true. James saw him and smiled, walked over, extended his hand. "Welcome," James said. "We're all betrayers here, all recovering empire servants, all learning that grace is real and sufficient and contagious." Merchant shook his hand. "I don't know how to do this. Neither did we. Still don't, mostly. But we're learning together." They sat in a circle, shared stories, testimonies of transformation, witnesses to grace, and somewhere in the middle of a testimony from a woman who'd been homeless and was now housed, who'd been invisible and was now seen, who'd been counted as nothing and was now accounted for, Merchant felt it, the recognition, the acknowledgement, the sense of being valued not for what he'd achieved, but for who he was. 20,000 units of worth, given freely, measured by God, accounted for by grace. He wasn't beyond redemption. Nobody was. That was the whole point. That was the gospel. That was the kingdom. Part 8. The Full Measure. On July 1st, exactly 3 months after the resurrection, the number reached equilibrium. 3,742,891 people marked accounted for. The spreading had slowed but not stopped, was becoming organic, natural, part of how systems functioned rather than an anomaly they struggled to explain. Gerald Hammond ran the final calculation. Each person marked 20,000 units of redemptive value. Total redemptive value in the system, 74,857,820,000 units. He stared at the number for a long time, trying to understand what it meant, what units that large represented. Then he realized it didn't matter. The point wasn't the number. The point was the principle. Every person counted, every person valuable, every person measured by God and found worth dying for, worth rising for, worth accounting for. That was the full measure of a human, not what you achieved, not what you accumulated, not what systems said you were worth, but what God said you were worth. And God said everything, all of it, the full measure, 20,000 units of infinite value condensed into finite form. The 70% you could work with and the 30% you could only receive. The silver you could circulate and the gold you could only acknowledge. The doing and the being, the measuring and the measured, the counting and the counted. The accounting and the accounted for. Gerald closed his laptop, sent one final email to the 12 witnesses. The numbers are complete. The measure is full. We've witnessed what we needed to witness. Now we just live it, spread it, be it. The kingdom has come. Not from above, from within. Not through conquest, through contagion. Not by force, by faith. The full measure of a man. 20,000 units of grace. We are all accounted for. Let's live like it's true. Gerald. The 12 responded with simple affirmations. Yes, amen, let it be, so it is. The witnesses were complete, the testimony was given, the gospel was spreading, and the measure of a man, the full, complete, sufficient measure, was finally revealed. Not what you earned, but what you were given. Not what you deserved, but what grace declared. Not what the system counted, but what God accounted for. All of it, every part, the full 20,000, given to everyone, equally, freely, forever. The measure was complete, the kingdom had come, and nothing would ever be the same.